welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We're going to have an interesting 2 hours tonight where we're going to be talking about mythology and higher consciousness. So we get to mix the old in with the new, with metaphysical. So it's going to be a multitasking kind of event tonight. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healing, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. So if you've been thinking about changing careers and working in a holistic health field, check out the programs they offer. www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. So I just have one really important announcement, especially if you're listening to the show now and you're kind of a night owl or an early bird. I'll be on Coast to Coast this morning at 2 o'clock Central Time, 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Way too early for me, but I'll be on being bright and perky with George Norrie on Coast to Coast. So check it out. And we'll be talking about my new book, E.T. Chronicles, what myth and legend has to say about human origin, as well as Icon, deconstructing the archetypes of the ancients. So don't miss it. Coast to Coast AM, George Norrie, 2 a.m. to 4, or 3 to 5 Eastern Standard Time. Woohoo! Okay, let me tell you about today's guest, and we will bring him on the air. Paul Boudreau is an ecologist and biologist who studied ancient myth and sites, including on-site explorations of Egyptian temples, tombs, and the pyramids. Ancient myths and sight have captivated his imagination and attention since childhood, struggling to understand the importance of what was taught to him as fairy tales. He has been fortunate enough to travel the world and to personally experience many of man's highest creations, both ancient and modern. And today we're going to be talking about his new book, Awakening to Higher Consciousness, Guidance from Ancient Egypt and Sumner. So please welcome Paul Boudreau. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Just fine, Dr. Rita. Just fine. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Did I say your name kind of right?
You did an excellent job. I congratulate you on
that. Thank you. Well, we have a lot to talk about because there's just so much material in your book that I think we're going to have a great conversation. But let's just start off easy. It's your first time on the show. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can start with a little bit of history from you. What got you interested in studying ancient mythology, ancient cultures, and their relationship to consciousness in the first place?
Let's go back to the beginning, I guess.
In the beginning.
In the beginning. And we do talk about creation myths, so it's a good place to start, in the beginning. Personally, I, as a child, was told fairy tales and stories, biblical stories, that struck me as absurd, if I can use the word. Genesis talking about naked people running around the garden with talking snake and things like that. And I don't know where it came from in me, but I always thought there had to be something more to these myths, these stories that obviously were cherished by the people telling me the stories, and I knew enough history that I knew they reached back in time to the beginning of civilization. So why were these stories important? And I guess it just started from there in terms of my own interest. Now, as I went through university and I managed to get a job, and I was very fortunate to meet Lloyd, my mentor, my friend, and we sort of started talking about these issues about the things we heard as children, and we connected on this common experience of, my gosh, these people are either stupid or they don't know what they're talking about. And this gave rise to a common interest that we shared about, well, let's dig into this as scientists and try to explore whether there is something more to these myths. So it's been a lifelong curiosity, a lifelong question of mine as to how can I make these myths more useful to me.
So why do you think that mythology and these type of stories have endured for so long? I mean, some of them are ancient.
Yeah, the stories we deal with are myths from 5,000 years ago. Some of the literature that we talk about is the very first literature that we know of as a human civilization. Why they're important? They are all good stories, and I think maybe we'll talk a bit more later on about levels of interpretation. But they're all great stories. We talk about Gilgamesh, and we talk about Genesis, and I think that's a key piece to the success of these stories, is that they really engage us, and you don't have to be educated to be entertained by them and be engaged. Do you know the nursery rhyme "Ring Around the Rosie"? Mm-hmm. Did you play that game as a kid?
Oh yeah.
So did I, and it was great fun, and we'd all fall down, and then we'd pick ourselves up and laugh and do it again. Well, it took decades before I was able to find a reference that pointed out that nursery rhyme is the story of the Great Plagues in the 1600s in Europe. The acha acha is the people sneezing, and then they all fall down dead. They all fall down dead.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it was the posies, because there was so much stench that they would put posies and flowers in their pockets or something, so that it would give them a better odor.
You're on your game, absolutely. So. How could a story about the Great Plague still be active today in schoolyards in Western civilization? Obviously, it is, and part of that has to do, well, it's a fun game to fall over as a kid, not so much when you get older. So a big part of the success of these myths and the transfer of knowledge has to do with, it's just, good old fun. It's engaging, and they're interesting, the stories of the hero doing great things. So that's easy to see. That the challenge that Lloyd and I encountered when we started this exploration journey, I don't know what we want to call it, had to do with kind of verifying for ourselves that myths actually contained information, contained real information, contained important information. And we started with a book called Hamlet's Mill by de Santillana and von Dischen. Do you know this book? It's a real tome.
I've heard the title, but I've never read it.
Right. Well, it's a very long, serious discussion that explores the Shakespearean play Hamlet and the story of Hamlet tied to the movement of the earth in the universe. And they do an excellent job of showing that, in fact, Hamlet's Mill, the myths associated with it, did contain, or does contain, real astrological, astronomical information that is carried down through the myth, even though it's not readily apparent in reading the myth itself. So that was part of what got us started in this exploration of creation myths. That okay, these myths are more than just fairy tales, more than just stories of long, long ago and far, far away. And that was a big help to us in sort of our take on what the myths mean to us.
Okay. But you're mentioning Hamlet, and I mean, Hamlet was written by Shakespeare, and so I don't know if when Shakespeare wrote it, he based it on some mythology from somewhere or whatever. But that obviously was a work of fiction. And one question I have for you is, what do you think about myths? Do you think mythology, that there's fact to mythology on one level? I mean, obviously, I believe that there are multiple levels in the mythology. So we'll get to that part later. But do you think that there is truth to the myths that we read, especially some of these old creation myths?
There's another book called, authored by Barber and Barber. I won't spend the whole night reciting references; they're all on our website, etc. But this other book looked at myths about from the point of geology, and they were looking. I'm trying to recall sort of myths about giants with red hair. That slept in caves that shook the ground, and it's actually it's not a bad read. This book that.
Okay, what book is that? Because now I want it.
It's authored by Barber and Barber, and I don't have the title in front of me. We'll have to do some social media stuff afterwards.
Okay.
And they look at the links between earthquakes and volcanoes with some of the mythical stories. And so when you've got a red-haired giant shaking the ground, they look back. I think they were looking from a Greek point of view or something, but they were looking at a great volcanic eruption in the Mediterranean, which I'm getting at the very extreme edge of my expertise here. But again, it was enjoyable to sort of see how they presented some of the myths in terms of real geological information, so yeah, absolutely, they contain information at many different levels, from earthquakes and volcanic eruptions to what Lloyd and I have worked on in terms of sort of self-development and how we might look at the world around us. And the book about the geology makes the point that the myths have to be simple. They have to, there's a number of aspects that make a myth succeed over the long term. If you got hundreds of names and complicated dialogue, that's not going to convey well. So the myths tend to simplify and focus on just a few very dynamic and interesting people, and so there's lots of myths that we haven't really gotten into in our book, but I think there's a lot more we have to learn and we should pay attention to.
You obviously haven't read any Indian myths where you have to sit there with your computer on to look up these names and who they are and what they represent. It's just like a research project just to make it through a page.
No, I haven't done that yet. Maybe it appeals to the culture. I don't know.
They got a million people all over the place, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because you read this thing and you think, oh, well, that's just, you just kind of go by the name and just ignore it. But then you find out that, like, this word here actually is talking about people that live in a fairy realm, or in the nether world. But you wouldn't really get that unless you looked it up, and it's not necessarily relevant on one level to reading the story. But if you know that, then it kind of takes it to a different place. But anyway, I digress. Let me go back to my question. So one of the things that I noticed was that you utilize, and I didn't write this question down, but the ECSL, where they have the Sumerian documents. And so it looked like you had gone through a bunch of the material they have on there, which is wonderful. Didn't you find it interesting how scandalous some of their myths were?
Scandalous? What are you thinking?
Well, like Enlil raping this woman, or these stories of intrigue that come down to us. That
I would get back to the last point. What that catches your attention, right? That makes. I mean, we all love gossip and intrigue. I hadn't thought about scandalous as a description.
I like scandalous. Good soap opera.
And Gilgamesh did the same thing. He was, taking young brides and taking their virginity and such. So it is an aspect. A good myth has all sorts of levels, and we shouldn't be too moral. Well, I try not to be too moralistic. I mean, try not to judge these myths. Scandalous, a couple naked people running around the garden is scandalous for some people.
Well, yeah. I just think, and I'd like your opinion, but I feel like we learn a lot about the society and culture in reading these myths. And so you read stories like that, and it's like, God, they were doing stuff like that back then, too.
I mean, back then, even over 5,000 years, I don't think we're that much different than the people that wrote these stories down. So there's a lot of stuff going on today that probably wouldn't have raised an eyebrow back in Sumer, and vice versa.
But going back to my comment, I mean, do you feel like myths provide us with insights into a society?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the myths capture a snapshot of the society. Gilgamesh was written by the Sumerians and not written down in total until the Babylonians 1,000 years later. And by the time the Babylonians got their hands on it, it was much more warlike, and it had different aspects that you don't find in the Sumerian text, the original Sumerian text. So definitely it changes, and in more recent times, some of the things that we explore are easily found in Christianity, but Christianity presents them in a certain way and in a certain light. So yeah, absolutely, the society is reflected in the myths, and the myths reflect the society.
And you get to know the people, and you get to know what they value, it seems to me.
If you can understand the message, yes. I always think of reading the sports page, and so not so much now, but one team would clobber another one, and if you just read the literal sports page at some point, you'd think that we were a bloodthirsty culture where we just set teams to kill each other. So language communication is always an issue, whether you're talking about your present day or whether you're trying to reach back in time to a different culture. It's not readily apparent sometimes what was actually being recorded in the ancient myths and in their language. And I expect the same will happen, 5,000 years from now when someone tries to understand what the Western world has been writing at. So there are insights, but one has to work at it. One has to be a bit careful, I think, not to get to be aware of this, be sensitive to what we know about these people. An example, the Egyptian culture is often presented as being a funerary culture. That all they worried about was death and funerals and dead people. But our work, we find much more written and represented in pictures that has to do with a lot with life, with living, with higher consciousness. An example is you probably know the text that has been called the Book of the Dead, right? Everybody knows the Book of the Dead title.
Yeah, I read it.
Cover to cover, I bet.
Yeah.
But its real title is The Book of Coming Forth by Day, or Book of Coming Forth by Light. And that title is quite different than the Book of the Dead. Gives a different impression. It would set the tone of how you would approach this text. And so in this case, the early explorers, investigators, misnamed it. And I think that as a result, that whole genre of literature, that whole book, the book has been sort of treated as dealing with something I don't think that the Egyptians were that concerned with. Now, no doubt, I mean, definitely the Egyptians, they had tombs, they had a lot of tombs, and Lloyd and I have been in a number of them, but they also had temples where people prayed and celebrated. Pyramids are a whole other thing that we may get to later in the conversation. But definitely they weren't only interested in dead people, and we find that very exciting. I think they have a lot to tell us about live people and me and you and how we can be more alive. So that's an example of how difficult it is to find out to try to imagine what those cultures were like.
And what about translation? I find it interesting because, all right, I don't even care. It's like, I like the Watchtower translation of the Bible. I don't know what it is about it, but I like that translation.
Okay.
And I will use it if I'm pulling out a biblical passage, usually an Old Testament passage, to put into an article or whatever. Mm-hmm. And oh my God, I get these comments from people, but that's not a King James version. It's like, it's the freaking Bible. But from your study, because I see that you have looked into the linguistics and that part, how much does translation from one version, one language to another really impact the message that we get in English?
Oh, it's huge. The guidance that we provide is really, one has to look interior to find out what relates to themselves personally. So I can understand you having, a particular translation which connects with you, and that is the most important thing. For all of these myths, we can see the actual Sumerian letters on this website you mentioned, the Electronic Textual Corpus of Sumerian Language, ETCSL, and I invite listeners to do a Google search on ETCSL, and you can see the letters, and you can see the translations, and one of the things we've done is to sort of go and try to make that comparison. Similarly with the pyramid texts, this is the earliest literature known to man, written down by the Egyptians inside the earliest pyramids they ever wrote. You could do a Google search for pyramid text online, and you could actually see the images, the hieroglyphics, and you could see the translation. One has to continually work to try to really get to the root of these myths, and English is the language we speak, and it's the language we understand the world in. But that translation from one language to another is it's not like pulling up a dictionary and flipping to various pages and figuring it out. I think it takes a lot of life experience, a lot of direct experience of what you've experienced, what you can remember in your own life, and we think that's the grounding that's needed when one approaches these ancient myths, because we do think that they tie directly to what we have lived through. Quite different than an academic study, where one has 6 or 7 different translations, and one could argue about the different usage through time. That's potentially very useful, but it's not particularly interesting to us at this point in terms of how we would apply the myths to ourselves. Yeah.
But I could see where there might be, since we're going to be moving into consciousness eventually, where there might be a word that would translate, in to maybe me or you to represent like a higher level of conscious mind. And the person just puts mind. And so the intention doesn't translate correctly, or, the bias of the writer doesn't have that experience to really understand what the concept is, or whatever gets put into this text. And now everyone goes, oh, and they lose the message.
Yeah, in Canada, I'm sure you may have heard this, that the Inuit that live up north have 35 different words for snow, whereas down here, snow is snow. Yeah, right. That's exactly the point, I believe. And when you get to things like bodies and consciousness, it's really not that easy. A body, a live body, dead body, corpse, body, a being, a human. So it persists in English and in all languages. And you're right, it's sometimes not obvious what is meant by the authors, nor what one could take away from it. It's one of the biggest challenges of the Egyptian. It is a very difficult language. Lloyd has had taken several years of study on Egyptian hieroglyphs, and it was it was essential to our visits to Egypt to read the hieroglyphs and put it together, because there's just one hieroglyph contains so much information that an English word may or may not have. That it's tough. It's tough, and our own advice to ourselves is don't be fooled by the first literal meaning, because that's probably not what they weren't protecting these myths for 5,000 years because of some literal meaning. They were generally trying to deal with very difficult topics. We think that the ancient Sumerians and ancient Egyptians were struggling with communication and language much the way we do now. Consciousness, awake, death. Even today, we don't have a very, very good handle on what some of these concepts mean. There's been a lot written recently about CT scans and MRIs for watching brain function. I'm not sure that's going to get us anywhere to know that, those electrons fired in your brain. The medical approach may not help us very much with understanding what we are as a being, what makes me alive right now. And when I die, if I die, or when I die, what's the big difference between a living person and a dead person? Is it electrons? I don't think so.
Me either.
Good.
I don't think that it's part of this three-dimensional world, or we wouldn't have so many situations of non-locality happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a lot we have to learn, and it's a great time. It's a great, interesting time to be working on the work of the ancients, and I know you've had guests looking at a lot of the archaeological and construction stuff. Schock in his work dating the Sphinx to 10,000 years ago, and Bouval and John Anthony West on the Giza Plateau, Scranton on his Dogon. Really fascinating. Now you've got Hancock and Andrew Collins looking at the Göbekli Tepe from 10,000 years ago. And I think, we're all sort of exploring the edges of what we know about civilization. Now, Lloyd and I are looking at the written piece, but there's all these pieces being tossed around, and we're all trying to figure out what is our history and how we've gotten to where we are. And I think there's still a lot to learn, both from language, from just even knowing how people lived that long ago. One of the interesting things about the Göbekli Tepe is, I understand, people believe it was built by hunter-gatherers. And
not really, but...
Tell me what you know.
Well, I mean, that's what the scientists say, and then there's everybody else that go, right, sure. And then we'll build the pyramids next week. Okay.
But we don't know. I mean,
We don't know.
We don't know, and that's what makes it so interesting. And the same thing with literature. We're trying to look at literature in a way that we don't really know or haven't known what these myths have been about, and can't believe that they were about dead people. Sorry to come back to that point.
Well, they might have been alive at one point in time, but after 5,000 years, I mean, unless they're a god, then, they're possibly dead by now.
Well, they're dead
unless they reincarnated,
And that's possible too. That's possible too. But the myths have so much more power, imagining them or seeing them in terms of being given to a live person, whether it's a shaman or someone, that's being initiated into higher knowledge. To me, that's much more exciting and interesting and mysterious than thinking that there were prayers said over a dead body, which is more, the Western Christian view of things.
Well, but if you look, I mean, I do ghost hunting, so of course I have to look at the whole concept of ghost from an antiquity point of view and where we really started believing in ghosts, the notion of ghosts. And there's like this whole thing. And so some of the rituals were so that the person who died wouldn't come back and haunt them, which is why there was, from my understanding, a lot of death rituals is to ensure they stayed in the grave.
Put them away.
And moved on. Go to the light, Pharaoh, go to the light.
Absolutely, that makes sense. But then at the same time, we know of a lot of, certainly the First Nations people in North America, the shamanistic tradition was still very active when the Europeans arrived, in terms of, specific individuals in the group that were connected on a different plane, or, they had different training and connections that were connected while they were alive, not maybe they were talking to ghosts, but certainly they were respected and played a large role in the day-to-day life of the civilization. We don't have that these days. Well, maybe you're as close as we come to it. That's great.
But I mean, and that's the part that I always, I have this whole list of questions, but I'm just going to go off topic here, or off my list. That's the part that I find the most fascinating, is that when we go back into deep antiquity, there is such a understanding and such a reverence and such a connection to that unseen world, and a deep understanding of how to connect with it and interact with it, that we have, I don't want to say completely lost, but in most parts of the world, we've completely lost.
That's a good example of seeing those civilizations as valuing it differently than we do today. And they have left lots of images and literature and writing that supports the idea that the netherworld was very real to them, and the gods were real. They interacted with the gods, right? I mean, it wasn't some old man on a cloud. It was something that was much more personal and participated in their lives. So yes, that is something that progress and engineering doesn't really support in modern day world.
I mean, I think it's been brainwashed out of us, but I find it interesting because there are so many people now wanting to see ghosts or tap into their intuition, or we have the quantum physicists talking about non-locality and string theory and all of these things that multiple dimensions and and I joke around, I'm like, go to the metaphysical bookstore and there's some really great books that I think you should read, and then come back and attack your theory again. Because I feel like it's information that we've already known. And
we don't know how to deal with it in an engineering world. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics are as weird as any ghost story I've ever heard. Non-locality and wave particle. I'm surprised.
Half dead cat.
Yeah. Well, it's either dead or alive. Yeah. So I'm surprised that the physics studies of the early 19th century haven't had more of an impact. We still, we still think gravity is an attractive force, and maybe that's because warping the time-space continuum is too difficult to get our heads around. But it doesn't seem to have made many people that much more open to these kind of intangible aspects of life that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And physics is, that's got to be as tangible as anything. If that can't do it, then why are we so quick to judge?
Physics is tangible?
Well, it seemed to be. You knock your hand on the desk and you think you're hitting solid wood, where in fact it's mainly space. Another side issue that
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll just move on. Earlier, you mentioned a number of different researchers, and one of them was Larry Scranton. And in his work on the Dogon cosmology, he proposes that each letter that forms a hieroglyphic, or a hieroglyphic word, has a meaning. And then if you look at the word, the individual words that are grouped together, that the group of symbols provides the reader with a description of the word, such as, and I was supposed to look this up, but I didn't, such as NASA. We say NASA, but it's National Aeronautics Space
Agency. Yeah.
Agency.
Mm-hmm.
In your studies, do you think that the hieroglyphics or the Sumerian symbols, the cuneiform, that there is an intrinsic meaning to each of their symbols as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to think of a hieroglyph, automatically I think that it has many levels of meaning and to the point where the placement of the hieroglyph to other hieroglyphs is important. In the book, we talk about from the Genesis story, the two fruits on the fruit on the two trees, and one is, in our interpretation, one is ha hetz and the other one's hetz ha, same syllables, but because they're reversed, one implies that one is eating from a fruit that sustains being over your physical life, and the other one is just going to support your physical life. So definitely these symbols, these hieroglyphs are just jam-packed with this symbology, this information, and it's not only what the symbol means, but where it is in relation to other symbols, and yeah, it's quite interesting way of containing information, whereas we see the letter A and it's just it's a placeholder. The hieroglyphs were used quite differently, and one can understand that it would take a lifetime for a scribe in ancient Egypt to appreciate what these symbols mean and how the proper use of the symbols, what is the proper use of these symbols. Through that, there's a lot of information that could be contained in a very small, small number of hieroglyphs. The challenge is teasing out all that information so that it makes sense to you.
But it makes me wonder if part of where we, and I'm going to say, went wrong was creating this separation between the meaning of the intrinsic meaning of the letters and the intrinsic meaning of the symbols to just a placeholder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know where that originated from. I blame a lot of our modern day misconceptions on the Greeks, and I don't know if this is another case where I should be complaining again about the Greeks or not. The Greek, much of our modern day culture is traced back to the Greeks, and democracy was invented by the Greeks. But in fact, many of the early Greek philosophers were trained in Egypt. We just didn't. We're not taught that. We don't know that. We don't generally know that. So some of the intermediate civilizations certainly have influenced what we've received from the ancient cultures, and it's again, it's hard to sort out who said what when and why they said it. I don't know where placeholders came about in terms of an alphabet.
Well, I mean, because even Judaism has intrinsic meaning. Hebrew has intrinsic meaning to their letters. Runes have intrinsic meaning to their letters.
Yeah.
And I don't, we can blame it all on the Phoenicians.
I like the Phoenicians.
I know, but aren't they the first ones to come up with like an alphabet?
Yeah.
We'll blame them.
Okay.
And they were everywhere.
They did travel all over the world, and they did pass a lot of their information on to the Greeks as well. So,
and we don't really know any of their names, so it's all good.
The only Phoenician I know named is Parmenides, who is he's claimed to be Greek, but he was actually a Phoenician that came out of the Turkey when things went bad. So, but you're right, there isn't a whole lot known about the individuals, and yeah, maybe they were the ones that put placeholders, but I'll have to look into that a bit more.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so let's kind of shift gear and spend some time in the beginning and talk about some creation myths. So in your investigation, have you found parallels between the Bible and other creation stories?
I'd flip it around. The Bible is very derivative. It was compiled around the time of the Greeks, sort of 2,000 years after the Sumerian and ancient Egyptians were writing about the netherworld, writing about the flood, writing about separation from heaven and earth and water from land and those sorts of things. So, depending how you look at it, the Bible came much later, and absolutely, many of the principal images came from cultures and civilizations that predated Christianity by 2,000 years. The challenge is keeping in mind that the Old Testament of the Bible really had to do with the Abraham lineage, which was kind of shared by Sumerian and Egyptians. So it's quite easy to go back, and the flood definitely comes from Sumeria, the tale of Gilgamesh, 3,000, 2,500 years BC, and has been included in a number of different literatures right up into the Bible. The Sumerian creation myth that we mention in the book has to do with the initial separating heaven from earth. Again, 2,000, 3,000 years BC. These ideas were well developed long before Christianity took hold. The Sumerian culture is an amazing culture that Western world really doesn't know much about, and I think that's a real misfortune, because in Sumer they had literature they were writing, they had written language, they had libraries, they wrote laws, and where most of us are taught that Hammurabi, the Babylonian, created the first code of law. Well, the Sumerians did it 1,000 years before that. So there's a lot in the Sumerian culture that I think, well, there's a lot that we should pay more attention to as providing the initial roots for a lot of these thoughts.
So, if I think about the Bible, just that creation, Genesis 1 through whatever.
First 5 books or so.
Well, no, I'm just talking about like Genesis 1 through 10, or I don't know, I would have to look it up.
Okay,
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was waste and void, and darkness covered the abyss, and the Spirit of God floated across the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." Boom. and there was light. And see, and that's just from memory, and that's bad. That's really scary when you can just pull that one out.
Well, I can read you the Sumerian equivalent from 2,000 years before the Bible. I can
Okay.
read that. The Sumerian creation myth starts, in days of yore, in the distant days of yore, in nights of yore, in the far-off nights of yore, in the years of yore, in the distant years of yore, when necessary things have been brought into manifest existence, when the necessary things had been for the first time set in order, when bread had been tasted for the first time in the shrines of the land, when the ovens of the land had been made to work, when the heavens had been separated from earth, when earth had been delimited from the heavens, when the fame of mankind had been established. And it goes on. Doesn't that sound familiar?
It does sound familiar. But I think it's interesting where it even is making reference to a time prior to the formation of anything, much less the earth. Kind of going back, and I'll go, use a kind of like going back to the Big Bang or whatever it was, making reference to that.
Let's shift gears a bit then.
Okay.
The way Lloyd and I present it is, what it's talking about is the creation of me out of a void. So I'm the void. So I'm that homogeneous, undifferentiated thing, that mass. And what we see in the creation myths is an excellent description of what goes into me as moving from that void into something that has being, something that's separated from the world, whether it's heaven from earth, mind from body, soul from spirit. We don't see them as talking about physical things or physicality so much as, oh yeah, it's talking about those early moments of awakening when I was barely a kid, and I remember waking up to seeing myself, and I was. And we see that this differentiation between heavens and earth and land and water in other cases has to do with those early moments of awakening to, holy cow, I'm alive and I'm here. And I've got, well, more than I've got toes, but I've got, I can see that I'm hungry at times, and, all the things that we eventually learn about ourselves. So that's our take on creation myths, in terms of it is providing us with a language that helps us to see our own development. And it may be about creation of physical worlds, but in our interests, there's much more to be gained by applying it to ourselves and saying, oh yeah, I'm awake. I was awake at a time and I wasn't before. And so yeah, that's the shifting gears, is that we think of it more as a sort of an internal creation of myself, not an external world.
I mean, that's a really interesting concept, or a really interesting perspective on it. And you're relating that to consciousness, or are you relating that to the whole, I'm going to say, just for lack of better words, experience on the third dimensional plane? The conscious awareness as well as the physical physical being here.
Yeah.
All of that.
Well, let me tell a little story about when
Okay.
when I was very young, preschool age. It was Christmas time, and I had my nose pressed up to the glass, and Santa Claus walked down the street. And to this day, I still have an incredible feeling of awakening at that time. I saw Santa Claus, and in addition to seeing all my gifts, go flying out the window because I wasn't in bed, Santa Claus was around. But I remember that moment. It was the first time I remember being Paul. I was awake, and I separated myself from all the things that had gone around me. Now, at that point in time, I hadn't even gone to school. I mean, consciousness, philosophy, those things didn't exist. But that movement existed. And it probably led to much of what I've studied since then, trying to understand what that moment was when I woke up. And I wasn't awake before then, and I was for the moment, and such is life. I probably went back to sleep again because I got hungry or something. So that's my struggle to communicate to you what that was, and to me that was creation. It was creation in a way that was very direct and very personal. And I probably had a few moments of that since then, but that was the first one, and that was my first point of being me, I guess.
And so you were able to identify kind of your soul in that moment, like you were able to be you fully present in that moment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, before that moment, I was a void. I was just, there was, I was a kid, obviously, but at that point, something changed, and I'm probably still trying to figure that out. That's probably why we got into myths and their ability to describe some of these processes in us that we really don't have the words for in modern day world. We think that the ancients were struggling in the same way we are today to try to describe those moments of awakening in our lives that we really don't have good description for. I mean, if I told you this morning I was on the back deck in the sunshine and had a crisp apple which tasted sweet, you'd have a pretty good sense of what I was experiencing, even though we've never met. To talk about consciousness or being or soul, I still struggle with the kind of words that make any sense to me as well as to somebody else. And we think that the myths provide us with some examples of some of that description.
Can you give another example? Do we find anything that comes out of maybe Egyptian cosmology to give us another insight into that?
Another story we deal with is Gilgamesh. This is the Sumerian myth that was written down by the Babylonians. And
I love Gilgamesh.
Do you? Oh, it's a great story. I mean, and it led to Hercules and all sorts of other later stories. Gilgamesh story basically is the story about a demigod, someone, God. Wow, he's pretty powerful. Even if he's half a god, he's still pretty powerful. But he's wreaking havoc in his homeland, and he's taking young brides to bed before they get with their husbands, and so the solution that is put in place is that they partnered the demigod up with Enkidu, and Enkidu is a hairy person being from the forest. And together, the god and the animal side they do great things. They cut down the forest, and they kill the bull of heaven. But eventually, Enkidu, the animal side, dies, and Gilgamesh has a strong desire for immortality. And he goes on and he does great things, and eventually he ends up with the flower, which holds the key to his immortality. His whole life he's worked for this, and now he has it in his hand. And towards the end of the story, what does Gilgamesh do? But he lies down beside a pool and goes to sleep, and a snake snatches the flower, and he loses his chance at immortality. From my point of view, that describes so many instances in my life where I set out to, whether it's pay attention to my breathing or sense my lower body, and ultimately when I think I'm getting close to success, I go to sleep and I get lost either by ambition or ego. And so that's one of the aspects of the Gilgamesh story that we tease out is this this difficulty of even a demigod to sort of stick with an intention to something that's very important to him. And we feel that the story of Gilgamesh really captures that whole aspect of my own desire to improve and awaken. So that I spend most of my life asleep. Maybe I think most people do, and the story seems to give us some language to explain why. Well, I know explains it, but at least puts it out there in black and white. you're likely to fall asleep at the moment you need to be awake, and off will go your flower of immortality, and you'll be back to where you were to begin with.
Yeah, I just keep going back to that's one of the earliest places where we find out that they had a belief in ghosts. Sorry, don't mean to go there, but I'm going there.
I'm not against ghosts.
No, I don't know. You were talking about the dead stuff, so now I'm like on this ghost thing. Sorry.
Yeah, are ghosts dead? They seem pretty alive, aren't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, to me, but one of the things about the Gilgamesh story is that it's kind of like the hero's journey, and he has to achieve certain things in order to get his just desserts. But it does have that very ironic ending, which is kind of like, the modern day cliffhanger. It's like, okay, so what's he going to do next?
But that hero journey is my journey. I mean, that's how can I be a full person? How can I you mentioned consciousness, and maybe this is the time to point out that we don't define consciousness in the book, because in fact we're not talking about awakening highest consciousness. We're talking about awakening higher consciousness, and this recognizes the fact that we do spend most of our life asleep. We're hungry, so we eat something, or tired, we go to bed. But what I was saying earlier, that there are moments when I'm more than that. So why the difference? Why can't I live, at that higher level all the time? And the hero's journey is, I think it's in some ways more difficult to be awake right now as it would be to cut down a forest. We feel that the ancients were trying to capture these subtle processes that go on in us, that in a way that helps us recognize them as real processes, and also help us try to pay more attention to them. So maybe I'll be a little bit more awake. Maybe I'll be a little bit more conscious.
Do you think our ancestors were able to recognize that part of the story?
Definitely
that deeper
did.
Meaning to it?
Yeah, I think there's always exceptional people around that are aware of this. I mean, I've met some people that in my life that they were very they had being, they had presence, they had more substance than other people I had met. Whether there were more of those people long ago than now, that's kind of speculative. I don't really know, but certainly there were enough of them back then to capture these images in the kind of phrase that I read and the literature that they wrote, so that it was preserved. And whether we encounter it in the Bible as the Bible story, or whether we encounter it in Sumerian or Egyptian hieroglyphs, somebody also obviously knew this was important enough to keep around. Yeah. Now,
but I guess I'm just getting a little bit stuck, because if it was important to just a finite group of people, then why would a population keep reiterating, like the Gilgamesh story? I don't remember how many different fragments they found of it where they were finally able to put the whole story together. But I mean, there were multiple copies of it generated, and so it seems like it was a popular narrative as well.
Yeah, and I understand it was sort of an oral tradition. It was just spoken by these amazing people in the Caucasus region. These people could remember thousands of phrases, and they would get together, and this was the early replacement for television, whereas these people would come and recite the story verbatim, every couple of every month, or every season, sort of thing. So a good myth has has those raunchy pieces. They also have the higher pieces, and I think if you're just interested in entertainment, I think one will focus on the raunchy pieces, if you're in search of something more, most good myths, all good myths, would have something more to offer you in terms of your training and your education.
Well, on that note, we need to go to break.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Paul Boudreau about his book, Awakening Higher Consciousness. His webpage is www.awhico, that's awhico.com, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello, and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. Thank you all for staying tuned into the second hour of the show. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. And so for anyone who wasn't listening to the show during the first hour, if you are up and around tonight, I'll be on Coast to Coast talking about my books, E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legend Has to Say About Human Origins, as well as my new movie, Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, still available from Amazon.com for $1.99 digital download. What a bargain! Anyway, we've been here talking to Paul Boudreau. His website is www.awhico.com. About his book, Awakening Higher Consciousness, Guidance from Ancient Egypt and Sumner. Paul, we got so busy talking and I didn't organize my thoughts. I know one of the things I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
We've been talking about creation stories and just about mythology, the narrative, and I'm going to say prose that we find in early mythology in that whole creation myth cycle. One of the things that I find fascinating and I don't have an explanation for is that in the Egyptian creation myths, they tend to be written in the first person. You know, I am this and I am this, which really falls out of convention of what we find in a lot of other mythic traditions. Any thoughts on that? Or do you find a difference in the way that material is being presented?
It's the latter. It's the way the material is being presented. The hieroglyphs are such a condensed form of communication. There's no symbol, there's no hieroglyph necessarily for I am, in terms of, I am God, or there's generally a hieroglyph that one has to read in to that hieroglyph, whether it's I or he or she or it. And this has caused obviously a lot of problems for interpreters, and it's not my expertise, but when we looked at the pyramid texts, these pyramid texts were written with a pharaoh in mind, because obviously the pharaoh had constructed the pyramid complex, and some people translated it as I am Ra, and some have translated it as Unas is Ra, and they're both valid interpretations of the hieroglyph. So I don't think you can read a whole lot into how it's presented. I don't know if you like leaving it open and loosey-goosey like that or not, but that's kind of the way they presented their language and their concepts.
Well, I was just wondering from a consciousness point of view if there would be more intrinsic power with the notion of I am or I versus, presenting it from a third person where you have to actually step into that other person's shoes.
For me, I like the I am. It does make it more direct and more immediate, but I have to be careful. That might just be a personal preference. The Egyptians, another insight into this, sometimes the Egyptian would draw a picture or an image as if you were looking at it, facing it, left and right reversed. And sometimes it presented as if you were looking out from it. So sometimes even the hieroglyphs go from left to right, and some go from right to left. So there's all sorts of deeper interpretations for the language in terms of how it should be read and how you should look at it, that reflect this, where's the observer in relation to the message itself. And where we always write left to right, we talked earlier about place markers. They had a much different view of the world, and the relationship of one to the other, a thing to another, is really highly developed. We look at Schwaller de Lubitz. I don't know if you know that author. He spent 20 years, I believe, in the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. And he's written a number of books, some published by Inner Traditions, their publisher. But one of the interesting things he found is that in some cases of the Temple of Luxor, there'd be an image on one side of the wall in one room, which required the image on the back side of the wall in the other room to complete the story. Again, it's beyond my understanding of Egyptian, but one can get a sense of the complexity of their thought by imagining how you would build a temple that required you to put two pieces together that you could never see at the same time. Very interesting kind of concepts in terms of how you're presenting things that way. So the I-you is a similar thing, a similar example of, they got very, very, very complex in their representation.
Do you find that level of complexity in the pyramid texts?
Absolutely. The pyramid texts. Well, one of the challenges that we address in the book is we look at the pyramid texts as instructions of initiation for a living person. Whereas others have looked at it and said, well, it's just prayers over a dead pharaoh. I'm willing to argue the point, but it's a much more interesting story and much more vital literature to think that it's written for someone that's alive and interested in higher planes of consciousness, and the netherworld is a real dimensional existence for these higher beings. So yeah, absolutely, the complexity is really quite astounding, considering the compression of information in the hieroglyphs. If I may, Lloyd and I managed to spend a couple of visits in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza, and we had a moment when there was only two of us in this special place. I mean, it's a phenomenal room in the middle of this huge pile of stone. And we hummed a note, and the whole chamber vibrated. It felt like the whole world was vibrating with very little, very low hum, very little energy on our part. The whole world seemed to sort of pick up on what we were doing. And so that it's another example of the kind of experience that the Egyptians built into their structures, is that they could amass this huge mound of stone and yet have it so subtle and so full of energy that a simple note could resonate through all the chamber. So I think there's there's much more we still have to learn about the Egyptians and the knowledge they had and how they try to convey it, whether it was in the actual architecture, whether it was in the images carved on the wall, whether it was the literature. There's a huge wealth of information that we're just starting to tease out, I think.
Well, with the pyramid text, excuse me, couldn't they have been for the pharaoh to use in order to help him get into the netherworld?
Absolutely, yes. That makes the most sense of all the possibilities. Most people don't realize that the pyramids were always part of a pyramid complex, and particularly the pyramid texts were only written in 11 of the very earliest pyramids ever built by the Egyptians. But every one the pyramid was just part of a larger complex. They were surrounded by a wall which contained the space. The pyramid itself was always entered through a temple which bridged, which allowed the person or allowed passage from the outside world into the walled area and into the pyramid. But fascinatingly enough, the temple, the pyramid, was connected to the riverbank of the Nile by an enclosed causeway. And at the riverside, there was another pyramid, another temple. So what we envision is that the pharaoh, the initiate, the person to be instructed, would arrive on the river to this riverside temple, valley temple, and make their way through an enclosed causeway, which it'd be about a mile long, I guess. And in the case of at least one of the ancient pyramids, the pyramid of Unas, in the ceiling of this enclosed causeway was a slit which would allow the person to look up and see the sky. So the person would arrive by boat, go to the temple, go up through this causeway, looking at the stars. He'd have another temple to pass through before he actually got into the pyramid, and then on the walls inside the chambers of the pyramid would be written the pyramid text. So it makes perfect sense that this would be an initiation sort of process that would be part of the preparation of the pharaoh for what he was about to read. He wouldn't just pull up in his sedan chair or something and hop in the pyramid. There were all these other parts of the journey that would take him from the river Nile and then place him inside of the pyramid to be able to read these pyramid texts. So it's very much an initiative process that would prepare him for reading these texts, which would not have been open to everybody. There's not I don't think the general public in Egypt would have made this journey. I think a number of very select people would, and so the pyramid text written on the walls would be just one piece of this whole journey and contain just one kind of information that they would have been exposed to.
Well, and the part that I find fascinating is that it was put up, if it is some of the earliest writing, but they had a full understanding of vocabulary. They had a full understanding of grammar. Mm-hmm. And, they built, where did that all come from? I mean, even the Sumerians, by the time they started writing, it wasn't like they were just doing chicken scratch. They had a full-blown system of writing that just, bang, here it is.
Yeah, when I say 2,500 years before Christ, that was the pinnacle. You're right, that was the top. Where did they come from? Yeah, we don't, there's some ideas and the whole idea of the Göbekli Tepe being tied to a megalithic culture, and then the Egyptian being tied to a megalithic culture. There's 8,000 years between the dating of the Göbekli Tepe and the building, or the parent building of the Egyptian pyramids. 8,000 years is a long time to develop literature, to develop concepts, It's only been 2,000 years since, I would say, the time of Christ, and we've gone from sandals and donkeys to sending spaceships out. So 8,000 years between Göbekli Tepe and ancient Egypt. There's a lot of time there that we don't really know what was going on.
But it just seems like there's a giant void. That's the part that's just so frustrating, is there's a giant void of nothing. Or very little.
Very little. My career was a marine biologist, and I'm curious to know how much of this void was caused by the melting of the glacier and sea level rising by 300 feet or something. I'm always intrigued to hear stories about evidence of civilization being found 100 feet down under the water, and that's happened certainly on the west coast of North America and such. So that void may actually be underwater.
And that's very possible. That's very possible.
So, yeah, we have a lot to learn, and maybe we'll in our lifetime we'll be able to see some of these, some more of this evidence trickle out as to what did happen between 12,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, and maybe we'll be able to fill in a few of those missing pieces.
Well, unless the levels keep rising like they're doing, and then we'll be able to say goodbye to Miami next.
Yeah, I wouldn't be buying a property in Miami. No, that's true.
Yeah.
So I mean that 10,000-year perspective, an ice age melting and sea level rise gives one a deeper appreciation for why there might be a void. And again, I'm very interested to see the work done on what I call the pyramid culture. Finding pyramids all around the world and trying to date those. And it's an interesting time.
Let's shift gears again.
Sure.
And do you think our goal here on Earth is to become more godlike? I said godlike.
Godlike, yes. Plotinus was a Greek writer, and he actually had a huge influence on Christianity in terms of writing about his understanding of the world and how we're all a piece of God, and we have an inner urge to return to become more like more godlike, if you will. I think that's tied to awakening. That's tied to not being asleep. Not being a stone, not being an animal, but being a man and being something more alive. What that means eventually for me when I'm ready to pass away, I don't know. But the world is more interesting when I ask those kind of questions.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And the reason that I'm asking that is because when kind of going back to something I said very early in the show,
mm-hmm.
Some of the stories of the gods don't seem very god-like.
Well, the Greek gods certainly don't.
Some of the Sumerian ones aren't that great either.
They had their quarrels and trying to kill man. I don't know. It's I don't know if there's such a thing as a higher gods and lower gods. My moments of awakening are all encompassing, so there's no real differentiation there. I don't know. I don't know what I would get if I tried to define those moments of awakening and as godlike and not so godlike. Interesting that Gilgamesh was a demigod. I mean, what's a demigod? I mean,
don't even get me started.
So, to be more of a person, I would hate to be on my deathbed and not think I was alive. even though I know that a lot of times I'm not. A simple example, I've been on those long night journeys where you're trying to drive from one place to another, and the only way to get there is to drive. And it's happened a couple times that driving in the middle of the night and all of a sudden waking up, and all of a sudden you're aware that what's going on, the lights, which only begs the question, well, where was I a few minutes before? You get, I don't know if you had the experience of driving to work and then all of a sudden you find yourself at work and you don't remember anything about the drive. Those sorts of experience show me that there are levels of consciousness, there are levels of being awake.
Mm-hmm.
Another experience that explores these levels of consciousness. I've run marathons, and one summer I was working to qualify for my Boston Marathon, and I took it upon myself to count every step that I ran that whole summer. So, to qualify, it requires, 50 miles of running a week and whatnot, at least that. And I took it upon myself to count every step. So I'd set my watch and I'd count up to 60 and the watch would beep and I'd start again. Several times that summer, I don't know if it was grace or luck or whatnot, I found myself running down the path, and I was aware that I was running and breathing and whatnot, and I was aware that I was counting, which seemed like a somewhat different task. And much to my surprise, a complainer, a little, the image of an angel and devil on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
A little devil appeared on my shoulder to try to talk me out of counting. Oh, you've counted enough, that you don't need to do this. You've done good, stop counting. And at that moment, there was another awareness of all these me's, all these I's operating within myself. The I that was running, the I that was counting, the I that was being the devil. And for just a few brief moments, life seemed totally different. It was like, my God, all this is going on in me, and I wasn't aware of it. I would love to be able to live with that level of awareness for longer. I might go crazy. Maybe I would be crazy. But it was fascinating to see, I guess it would be like a mantra, this counting, sort of engaging enough of my ego so that these other sides could make themselves so clearly visible to me. So another example of my own personal experience of higher conscious but lower consciousness as well, that really convinced me that yeah, I'm not awake much. I spend most of my time asleep, and I think it is incumbent on me to try to be asleep less, try to be more awake and more aware. If that's godlike, I don't know, but that's the goal.
Any thoughts on why we can't be in that state all the time or more often, and why it tends to come on like a fleeting moment and then disappears from our existence until the next moment?
Next blinding glimpse of the obvious?
Yeah.
I've read a lot of people, and no one seems to explain that quite. Well, no one seems to explain it. Plotinus, again, I mentioned, he sort of states it as kind of inevitable, that you'll have a moment of grace, and then you have to, I don't know if he said you have to go back, or you do go back. It's like Gilgamesh falling asleep by the pool. There seems to be something natural in it that I really don't understand yet.
Falling asleep by the pool?
Yeah. Have my goal snatched out of my hand as I sleep by the pool, much like Gilgamesh.
Well, it was laced. The pool was laced, and it just, knocked him out, and then the snake came.
Maybe life is laced with sleeping pill or something. We just are more comfortable being asleep when part of us doesn't want to be asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the concept of having the serpent take it away, takes us back to that whole notion of, bad or evil or that thing too.
Yeah.
Like this is his dream. This is what he really wants. And now it's being taken away.
But there's something natural about it. I mean, again, I seem to like being asleep. The snake is just doing what he's doing. I just don't have what it takes to stay awake to get that flower of immortality back home with me. Or maybe I have to try again. Maybe it's lining me up for my next big hero adventure to try to accomplish what I say is my goal, even though I'm not very adequate to the task. Maybe that's the basis of the hero stories, is to remind myself that, yeah, there is a hero down there somewhere. Maybe with time and effort that might just help me someday make it. Mm-hmm. The Star Wars, image of, Luke.
I was just thinking of like, Lord of the Rings, and they're on the rock, and they're outside of Mordor, and Sam and Frodo are on the rock, talking about, do you think they'll tell stories about us?
Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a distraction, but I saw somewhere online, I think that, it was online, someone suggesting that, why didn't the eagles just fly them there? And I thought, oh, come on, that would be a crappy myth if, this big higher power just flew them over to Mordor and dropped the ring out. You needed all that fighting and all that other process to make the story, to make it what it is.
3 books long.
It was a bit long, but the netherworld, another similar concept by the Egyptians and Sumerians. This process that you've got to prepare for, and you've got to wear the right clothing, and you've got to remember the right verses, and then when you go down through the netherworld, you're going to be challenged, and if you've got enough awareness to remember your lessons, and you get through all the gates, and out you come the other end, a much better person. Well, you don't have to go through that netherworld process, but the end result is something we should be aiming for. So why all the drama? It seems part and parcel of the process that's going on.
Do you think we need to go through the netherworld in order to emerge reborn on the other side? Do you think that needs to be part of the process?
I think so, yeah. If you without effort, there's no reward. There seems to be some requirement to be tempered by those challenges, to test your mettle, to make sure you are a hero, that you do have what's required to be a higher person, a different person. And without the process, you're not going to make it.
Well, and I think there's like a cleansing part that would have to come out of the challenges. You hear the stories of the underworld or the netherworld, and there are all these obstacles and challenges that need to be faced and addressed before you can, as in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, be weighed against
book by coming forth by day, please.
Yeah, that one.
That one.
It was kind of a boring read. I'm sorry. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was much, much more interesting.
Oh, was it? I haven't read that one.
Well, the Tibetan Book of the Dead addresses more of how you help a spirit get into the light and let the spirit know that it's dead and that it can move on. Okay. I mean, it was a totally different take on the dead topic. Where the other one seemed like it was more of a purging and, getting through obstacles so that you can emerge victorious on the other side. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, emerge different, in a different state. Yeah, that's right. And the preparation for the journey through the netherworld is important as the journey, and yeah, you have to train. Yeah, it's none of this is easy. If it was easy, I guess we'd all be floating around on clouds. Why the netherworld challenges are so essential is the same kind of question as, why would I want to be awake? Is it for everybody? Maybe not, but for me, yeah, it's enough. It's important enough to at least keep in the back of my mind when I'm going through my daily sleep routines.
But it seems like only people that successfully navigate the neither world will emerge on the other side. It's not that everybody can go through, and if you don't make it through, you get relegated to wherever.
Yeah, I don't know where the average person goes. The journey through the netherworld I don't see as for everybody.
It's like joining the Marines, and you have to do that like training where you stand in the ice cold water with all the guys holding a log for like 3 days. It's like, I don't think so.
They get something out of it. I bet you they get something out of it. That is spiritual training and challenges, I guess, have been around. We see it in the literature we look at. It's always been around. So obviously humans are, I don't know if they're predetermined to sort of take on these silly challenges or not, but we're not programmed to just lie around and do nothing. Mm-hmm. At least not now.
So do you think that this deeper level was important to our ancestors to explore their consciousness? Or do you think these stories were encoded so that when the time was right, we could utilize them?
Don't think it has to be one or the other. Certainly it was important to them, and it's like raising your kids. A connection with this is beyond the personal, so there's always that awareness of something more, something down the road. We know we're not going to live in this form forever. Whether we get reincarnated or live as ghosts, we have to accept that life is changing and is going to go on. It'd be hard pressed to speculate on whether they were doing it for themselves or for others. I'd probably average it and say probably a little bit of both.
See, the part that gets me is there obviously was this level of importance to these stories, but if the stories were fictitious, and they were just these fairy tales, even though there was a deeper part to it, then why go through the trouble of documenting them?
Case in point, the pyramid texts. They didn't just document it. They carved these bloody things on stone in the middle of...
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So obviously...
you wouldn't want to put like a Danielle Steele novel in there or Stephen King. Why bother if it was just something that you made up and there's not value? There's value to these things.
The idea that this initiation, if we will, for the pharaoh was critical to civilization is probably not far off. The belief system, and we say in our book that myths are critical to the development of civilization. Those belief systems are the cornerstone of what happens to the civilization, how they view the world. There's a book by William Sullivan on the Inca. I don't know if you encountered this. Where he looks at the Incan myths about the Milky Way and the stars as a predeterminant to why the Incas fell to the conquistadors. There was 140 conquistadors sail up on a ship, as opposed to tens of thousands of Incas. And Sullivan does an excellent job of teasing apart their myths to show that they were expecting the end of their world. And for this reason, 140 Europeans were able to totally put an end to the civilization. So that's an example of the power of myth, the role of myth. And, if it was critical to your civilization that the pharaoh had to go through this process of, arriving at the Nile temple and going through the causeway and getting into the pyramid and properly prepared, read the pyramid text on the wall, if that was critical to how you viewed the world, then one can appreciate that they would put all that effort into it. It's not tangible from our point of view why that would happen, but it sure was important to them. Maybe the culture then could appreciate the results of that initiation more than we do now. The First Nations people in North America, the shaman was a very special person, key to the survival of the civilization. So I think it's on that level that you have to appreciate what a civilization does is based on the myth. I mean, heck, we're sending spaceships out past Pluto. We're buying into that modern myth that's useful to do. May not be, may be viewed by different civilizations differently, but certainly that's what we are doing, and maybe that's our own way of writing down our legacy to the future.
I think our legacy to the future is going to be their belief that we worship the god of the golden arches.
There's a lot of golden arches around that
That's right, and
support.
Well, no, but I just figure in 5,000 years, when they start digging around, it won't be destroyed because it's styrofoam and it's not biodegradable.
The ink will still be readable. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's kind of scary.
I mean, hopefully there's still people around in 5,000 years. So.
Well, when the poodles take over the planet and they start digging around and, archaeologically.
Well, beetles aren't killed with nuclear radiation, so there's always hope. There's always hope.
Ooh, a bug infested world. Ooh.
we should do a movie.
That's okay. I won't go see it.
So yeah. The Egyptians put a lot of effort into the pyramid text, and it makes more sense to us, and if we look at it in terms of initiation and getting the highest out of at least a select group of Egyptians that knew more about life, could participate more in life, could keep civilization going. I don't know, but impressive pieces of work, and on top of just having those big rocks. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that myth and mythology has shaped society and culture?
Oh yes, yeah. I think we're living. I think we're living with the myth of progress right now.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we feel that we're getting better with each passing day. When we look at the myths and some of the concepts they contained, some of the rocks they moved, that idea of getting better every day with each passing year is a little harder to accept. At least you have to accept that there were peaks and valleys in our development. So now we live as a sort of an engineered society that, if we can engineer it better, we're better off. Whereas the metaphysical, the spiritual side is not as actively supported. We were building this huge Large Hadron Collider in CERN and to smash atoms together. But there's a lot of other things we could be doing with our time and our money that may be more profitable in the long run than smashing atoms together.
Okay. But I mean, do you think stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh has fostered a thought or a belief or concepts that we are utilizing principles that we find in narratives like that to live on today? I mean, I know that biblical narratives definitely have influenced the direction and course that society has moved forward in, in the Western world.
Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Yeah, we're all taught mathematics, and we're taught, chemistry and biology and whatnot, and accounting. We don't have similar, attention paid to our spiritual beings and our development. So that's a sign of our civilization, that we just don't pay that enough attention. And we have a hard time appreciating other civilizations that other cultures that do that. So whether it could change, I'm not sure. Civilizations do come and go, and there's lots of examples: Inca, Mayan, Egyptian. So what the long-term end goal of Western civilization is, I'm not sure.
Well, we don't know either, and we live here.
Yep, we vote, we pay taxes, and we don't complain too much.
Well, yes, we do.
Oh, do we?
Yes, we do. You must not have a Facebook account. Right?
Oh, yeah. Well, those are little complaints. That's not real changing the world complaints.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have, I'm going to say like 10 minutes. Something that we talked about a little bit, but not really, was the concept of ritual, and I want to expand that to magic and ritual. In these early cultures, it seems like the concept of magic and ritual take a very important role. Why do you think that?
Well, in the Egyptian, there was this balance between the god, the neter, the principle of magic, and the god, the neter of Mat. Mat is order, justice, truth, sort of thing. In modern day world, we like order. We like logic. We're run by our minds, and we undervalue the role of magic. But as a biologist, there's still a lot of intangible things that happen in life that really are hard to explain on the basis of atoms or molecules or, the rational order, physical order that we live in. So I see magic as a useful term to describe a lot of these intangibles that we encounter in our day that has no other meaning. I mean, the magic of life or the magic of death. What happens from a living state to a dying state. I think you could probably trace that back to Christianity. Christianity really didn't like magic, and they saw magic as bad magic and against them. And so it's been really taken out of Western culture, such to the point that, it's not very well recognized. It's not even suitable to sort of have a discussion on magic. But yet there are these intangibles in life that we have to recognize. Love makes the world go round. People live and die for love, and what role those intangibles play in our life are important to recognize. And I would call that magic. I'm not sure if that's the magic that you would be talking, that you conceive of, but it's more than entertainment, more than sleight of hand. I think it's a real process that exists.
Well, I mean, Jesus did magic. Oh wait, those were miracles. That's right. Wait, but they both start with M, so that's close, right? I mean, that's the part that I think is interesting, is that Jesus was able to do these feats, which, they don't really tell how he did them. He just did them. But it seems like it's almost as if they don't want anybody else doing it, because then it deters or takes away from Jesus's ability to transcend.
Yeah, you've got to make your local hero special somehow, and if you can't, well, I guess you do both. You build them up, and you make sure that there's no opposition. So Miracles, yeah, they're magic, but I think there's things closer to us that, again, the feeling that you have when you see a beautiful sunset. To me, those are kind of day-to-day magic things that we don't really appreciate enough.
But when you experience something like that, I mean, it puts you back in or closer to that divine state, to that feeling of higher consciousness that you were talking about earlier.
Yep. Would a nice sunset be better than watching a nice sunset every evening be better than a six-figure salary? Possibly. It might make you might live longer, but it does make you feel different. And I don't think there's any way that you could describe it better than magic. I mean, an MRI or a brain scan might tell you which electrons are firing, but to my knowledge, no one is making any progress in terms of really capturing what is the evidence for higher consciousness, higher awareness, with all this technology we have. So magic, I think, deserves a bit more respect in our civilization. Much like, a shaman or, just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't influence us and doesn't improve our lives.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I was thinking, was the whole shaman type idea where they are able to do things, or you hear these about these yogis in India who are able to, I don't know, create rose petals or whatever they do, and just manifest them. Just, I don't want to say through their will, but by connecting with some unknown, some unseen force in the universe. I mean, I don't think that they would, have like a little secret slide in their, jacket that would make little rose petals appear, on command, kind of thing.
That would be a bit silly, but are you aware of Paul Brunton? Paul Brunton did some studies in India and the Middle East, and one of his books he writes about a mystic. I should have dug out the book. Tyrone Bray, I think the name might be. And this would have been the early 1900s. And this Bray, I think that's the right name, could go into a trance. And he was buried, they buried him for like 48 hours in an airtight coffin. And they opened up the coffin and he was awake. And then they could, put pins into him. The story seems to imply he had a connection with a way of operating that we don't, and it seemed very well documented by scientists at the time, and they did it under controlled conditions, and this, I guess it'd be a fakir, or I think that might be the right term, was able to do incredible things beyond what the normal human could do. I've got no reason to doubt the observations that were made. I wish I could do that. I have no idea what kind of thing he was tapping into, but it certainly, again, gives some insights into what our capacity is if we were different, if we were better, if we were more awake. I don't know.
Well, and I guess I bring that up because if I recall, in like Autobiography of a Yogi, he was able to maybe not do that, but was able to do a lot of different things. And it was all because he was able to tap into that unknown, unseen, energy that exists, and that was just a byproduct of him being able to tap into it.
Magic? Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what we call it. Some people will call it a miracle. I like calling it a miracle because it sounds better.
That's fine, but it gives us something to look, something to strive for. Life can be different, and Might even be better. I don't know.
Well, I mean, do you think by tapping into our higher consciousness that we end up being better? Do you think that over time, if enough people tap into their higher consciousness, that society would be better? That kind of thing?
Yeah, both. I can speak more for personally. Yes, when I have those moments of awakening, life is better. And it's easy to imagine that if many people lived like that, society might be better.
See, it just makes me wonder, if we were in those kind of moments more often, would we really care about the big house and the fancy car and all of the things that we surround ourselves with in contemporary society? Or would we just let them go because they'd really become unimportant?
They'd become unimportant. There's a number of people writing these days about happiness. What makes us happy? They're finding certain basic, levels of income and health that are required, but beyond that, the happiness that comes out from, a six-figure salary and a big house and a big car, really don't justify the effort we put into it. I don't think we have alternative things to put our effort into, and that may be one of the problems of our society, is that we're not given these other alternatives. But how big a car do you need? How big a plot of land? Even in the 19th century, you could see that those standards changed based on what we were taught and how our neighbors performed. The single-family home with a two-car garage sort of came after World War II, and it's sort of accepted. I love the idea that New York City is one of the most ecologically friendly areas in the world because of the density of people and the ability to handle people in New York City. But when you talk to most Westerners, it's, oh no, I want an acre of land and a car and a house. Yeah, we can change our desires and we could be happy with other things. What would make us make those changes, I don't know yet.
I don't know, but I think we need to do something.
Do you have to sit in traffic to carpool to work?
No, my commute consists of going downstairs, getting something to drink, and walking back upstairs.
That's my commute these days as well. But for all the time people spend in cars and traffic jams, you'd think that someone would realize that maybe that's not the best way to live your life.
Yeah. But I think that that's changing, and I think more and more people are trying to get out of that. But I'm looking at the clock. We need to wrap.
Really?
Yeah. It catches me by surprise sometimes. If someone wants your book, Amazon, where's the best place?
Well, our website has links to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you could buy a Kindle version on Amazon. So again, the website awhico.com, or do a Google search on awhico. And we got Twitter, Facebook. We're easy to find, hopefully.
Easy to find.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on and spending time with us today.
What a great chat. Good fun.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a great weekend, and I am sure I will talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Take care,
Okay.
Dr. Rita.
All right. All right. Bye.
Bye.
That's Paul Boudreau. His book is Awakening Higher Consciousness. His webpage is awhico.com. Next week, we're going to be having Nick Pope and maybe a couple other people on talking about Rendlesham Forest UFO encounter. Till next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.